Like all competitive games, in Yu-Gi-Oh! There are usually just a handful of truly viable strategies to bring to a high level of competition. Be it because of their consistency, power, or diversity, Yu-Gi-Oh! Meta decks find dominance one way or another, with most event top cuts being filled by one or two decks. Sometimes, however, players find the way to sneak in those top tables with some very odd decks. Be it because of an advanced meta call, playing something most players don't know how to deal with, or simply by being lucky. The decks we're going to be looking at today found their way to top cut in premier events, dominated by strategies that certainly are not as weird as these. And for our number 10 spot, we have a fan favorite for most players because of the sheer simplicity of the deck, Gren Maju de Aiza. The format in September 2019 was one players are pretty familiar with and remember fondly, close to the end of the Thunder Dragon, Orcus, Salamangreat, Sky Striker format, or TOS. In this format, 773 players showed up to Niagara Falls to participate in the YCS taking place there. This event was, as expected, dominated by a wide variety of Sky Striker, Orcus, and Thunder Dragon decks. The format was more than well established, but some decks were able to sneak through somewhat consistently, like the Cyber Dragon variant of Orcus, which managed to also top. One deck that had been somewhat relevant, achieved tops in regionals and lower level events, was Danger Gren Maju deck, enabled thanks to Gizmecha the Serpentron Sky Slasher. The deck achieved a little bit of relevance in a regional scene as a Saki OTK deck that could steal games off the Danger engine in Gren Maju, attacking for over 5,000 attack. Still, players were shocked to see David Mendoza successfully pilot the deck to an impressive first place finish at YCS Niagara Falls. David's deck made use of the ability to draw through your entire deck with the danger monsters and able to facilitate finding blowout cards like Hey Trunade and Super Polymerization, while being able to play at its own rhythm. The deck played almost like a control deck, biding its time until you can out-resource your opponent and lay the beat down with a massive Gren Maju, backed by Danger Bigfoot, Danger Thunderbird, and Gizmecha, the latter being the most important card of the deck by far. This level 8 did pretty much everything the deck needed it to do. It was a decently sized body that summoned itself for almost no cost as a quick effect, while growing your Gren Maju, and even featured occasional spot removal with its second effect. While the card was a beast in Orcus decks, it was the life and blood of this danger strategy. Thanks to this powerful card, coupled with some smart plays and a deep understanding of the current format, David managed to claw his way up a mountain of Thunder Dragon remains to crown himself as the YCS Niagara 2019 champion. If the 2019 format is remembered fondly by most of the player base, the 2018 format is remembered with disdain and pure hate. This was the year where Firewall Dragon was most relevant, birthing a myriad of unfair combo strategies that either took away all your life points on the first turn, or just took all the cards out of your hand on the first turn. And even if you were not playing a Firewall Dragon, you were either doing FTKs with Pendulum Magician or flooding your opponent with True Draco. Not really a fun time for most players. However, one of the game's most celebrated players decided to show up to YCS Milan 2018 with a deck which was largely considered unplayable by all measurable metrics, Prank Kids. Released in Hidden Summoners, Prank Kids was correctly disregarded for being as viable as the other two archetypes released with it, Nephthys and Mayakashi. And while the deck was not good per se, they did find some potential in the fact that nobody would know what the deck did and use that advantage to blow his opponents out of the water with the extremely powerful Prank Kids engine. Bear in mind, this is long before the adventure cards and Prank Kids Meow Meow Mew were released and transformed the deck into a tier 1 meta threat. Indeed, this was the one and only top that Prank Kids strategy got at a premier event before their Link 1 monster ruined the format. And it's with good reason. The deck having access to Prank Kids Rip-Roaring Roaster and Prank Kids Battle Butler meant that any board your opponent could piece together would be buried with a board wipe and childish laughter. With smart deck building, exploiting the advantages of running an unknown deck, and just being a very, very good player, they were able to defeat 8 Sky Striker decks together with other meta-defining archetypes to win the whole event, with one of the most unexpected decks to ever win a YCS, causing the price of these previously cheap cards to skyrocket. Just remember that before spending hundreds of dollars in a new deck, you might be able to get a copy of a good player's deck list, but probably won't be able to copy their skill. You know, if I had a penny for each deck that won a YCS during the 2018 Hell Scene and then never did anything else again, I'd have 2 pennies. Which isn't a lot, but it's weird that it's happened twice. Months before Prankins won YCS Milan, Marco Piero won YCS Bochum with World Chalice. In case you missed this early Link era deck, it's centered around link climbing and using vanilla monsters to make wide link boards with a lot of interruptions. Exploiting the deck's ability to spam the board, Marco designed a deck that was balls to the walls combo, using the Agent of Creation Venus to summon a bunch of Mystic Shine Balls in order to turbo out Saryuja Skuldred. But not just one, but twice. And Saryuja was the perfect card for this deck, enabling absolute nonsense. Be it using Rescue Ferret to summon a Saryuja's arrows to the deck's main strategy, summoning Gameciel the Sea Turtle Kaiju to your own board to use its effect. Yeah, did you know that Gameciel has an effect? And not just any effect, it can remove 2 Kaiju counters from anywhere in the field to negate and banish any card as many times per turn as you want. Couple that with a card which would take a while to be well known to players, Herald of Orange Light and Eva, made for a deck that could just steal games from under you and there's nothing you could do about it. And yeah, being able to spam Saryuja until you draw Soul Charge is pretty crazy when you don't have to worry about Nibiru. This was all enabled by an engine specifically designed for link climbing, since all the World Chalice links, like Aram the World Chalice Blazemaster, allowed you to summon World Chalice monsters when they're linked off, using the hard-to-reach 4 monsters to make your first Saryuja. Oh yeah, and also Brilliant Fusion was utterly busted. Still, this was the perfect storm. In a field of Pendulum Magician, True Draco, and 60-card piles, World Chalice somehow went undefeated through the entire tournament, and then proceeded to not do anything else ever again. 2012 was a rough time for Yu-Gi-Oh! Xyz monsters were just released, and after a ban list to ensure that players wouldn't play the synchrocentric decks, they were dominating the previous formats, the stage was overtaken by Dino Rabbit, Wind Up, and the very start of Inzectors. Out of these 3, the deck to beat was most definitely Dino Rabbit, a strategy which employed the newly released Rescue Rabbit to summon 2 either Kaboozles or Sabersaurus in order to make Evilsaur Dulka or Evilsaur Logia. At YCS Atlanta 2012, this deck took up 15 spots out of the top 32, being the most dominant by quite a bit. However, in one of the most surprising outcomes of the game's history, Marquise won the entire event with TG Stun. Not just that, but in a format where Maxi and Effect Veiler were considered mandatory in order to compete against meta decks, Marquise played none of each. Entering the event on a whim, with it being his first YCS, he went in with the goal of making it to day 2, playing calmly and just focusing on each game, and it paid off. The TG cards acted as a value engine which enables synchro plays and works really well with a massive number of traps, which allow him to control the flow of the game and blows the opponent out of the water. Horn of the Phantom Beast allows all of his monsters to beat over pretty much anything, getting you more card advantage by drawing cards. Most importantly among his cards was Skill Drain. This, in tandem with Beast King Barbros, allows you to get the biggest body on the board while completely locking down most stacks with almost no effort. The reason this deck managed to do so well in this event was because the sheer dominance of the early combo decks like Inzector and Windup skewed deck building towards dealing with them, allowing TG Stun to sneak under the radar and play almost uninterrupted. Your opponent's Maxis will do little when you normal summon TG Rush Rhino and set TG1 EM1. Staying in 2012 for now, our next installment is the first in this video to not actually win the event it topped. Monster Mash at YCS Providence 2012. Now, a Yu-Gi-Oh deck is usually comprised of more or less balanced ratio of monster spells and traps. However, at times, players decide to innovate in that elemental deck building rule. This is one of such cases. As the name implies, Monster Mash is a deck comprised of a vast majority of monsters and just 4 spells in this case. Now, jamming as many monsters as possible in the same deck is an alluring prospect for a lot of players, as we've seen the same idea several times. Edison format features a 100% Monster Mash brew that looks remarkably similar to this entry. And in more recent times, we saw both Burning Abyss and Thunder Dragon played all monster lists, including only Sekka's Light, which saw great success until the card was hit in the ban list. Still, this deck walked so all those others could run. The deck was focused on a machine theme, making use of the powerful Machina engine, since Machina Fortress is such a versatile card, enabling sporadic rank 7 plays. If we're talking about Xyz monsters though, where this deck really shines is with rank 5s. Ghost Ship in tandem with Light Ray Sorcerer enables a pretty sweet toolbox comprised of Adres, Keeper of Armageddon, Trias, Keeper of Genesis, and Wind-Up Arsenal Zenmayo, which were all superbly powerful cards for the format. Couple that with cards that exploit the deck being 90% monsters, like Witch of the Black Rose, as well as Gallus the Star Beast, which coupled even better with Gen X Ally Birdman, also searchable with Gen X Neutron. Overall, the deck was just well built and had access to very good tools to deal with the threats present in the format. Even cards like Cyber Altanin and Cyber Dragon facilitated effective outs to most meta decks. In the end, this all coalesced into one of the most interesting built decks ever topping, but that might be overtaken by our next entry. Now, up until now, we've looked at decks that have topped YCS events, which is the most common premier event with the most attendance and competition. For this, however, we're going to be looking at the most interesting deck to win the World Championship, Chainburn. in 2017, which is impressive to say the least. Not only that, but it was played by one of the game's most well-known rising stars, Yugioh. Being just 12 years old, he showed up to the Dragon Duel World Championship with Chainburn. Needless to say, the World Championship features the most competitive players, and the best decks possible for that event. And while this was the Dragon Duel version of the event, that is, the event designed for duelists 12 years and younger, it doesn't mean this is any less of an achievement. These kids are not playing around. The event was full of all of the top decks of the format, True Draco and Yangzing Dinosaurs. Still, among all of those big, powerful decks, Yugioh took the crown with a deck playing 25 traps, most of which dealt direct damage. Absolute King Backjack is an obvious inclusion in a trap-heavy deck, but cards like Lazion the Time Lord and Dice Jar are anything but cards you'd expect to see in the World Championship. Couple that with Burn Staples, Chain Strike, and Just Desserts, Blazing Mirror Force, and even Secret Blast for the True Draco matchup, this deck was piloted by one of the game's strongest players. It managed to high roll all the way to flipping a Secret Barrel to beat another very decorated player invoked True Draco in the finals. All in all, this is a deck we very rarely see in recent times. And by recent times, I mean pretty much anything after like 2012. Still, the deck goes to show that sometimes just playing a high roll deck, coupled with being a very talented player, can do it, even at such a high level event. Fast forward to March 2016, we find ourselves looking at a kind of event we don't really see anymore nowadays. The Altered Reality Games Championship Series, or ARG. ARG was a store and team that created one of the most successful, non-official tournament scenes the game's ever seen, which were pretty dominant during the 2014-2018 era. Some of these tournaments coalesced the players' frustration with the format into custom ban lists, which is not something we see too often. For this specific event, the ban list was the regular one, which meant the format was dominated by Cosmo, Pendulum, Phantom Knights, as well as Monarch decks. This made for a nicely competitive event, where most decks are well established and proven to be powerful, consistent choices for the format. Not just that, the event was also stacked regarding players, featuring some of the biggest names at the time, and one of them walked away with the ring, Calvin Tahan. But he did so not by playing a proven deck like Monarch or Cosmo. He decided to show up with nothing other than Super Quantum. In case you're not aware, Super Quantum is an XC-centric deck that aims to summon its giant boss monster, Super Quantal Mech King Great Magnus. And while he didn't manage to bring it out near the tournament, the rest of the deck was more than capable of holding on its own. This strategy made use of the 3 Rangers, blue, green, and red layer, coupled with a pet, Super Quantal Fairy Alphen, in order to establish a resource engine that runs to the archetype's powerful XCs. Super Quantal Mech Beast Ouroboros for changing the position of monsters, Super Quantal Mech Beast Grampulse for back removal, and Super Quantal Mech Beast Magna Liger for monster removal. Mixing this with the brilliant fusion engine allowed for a consistent strategy that could easily flood the board and easily overtake their opponents with advantage. Sadly, the banning of Brilliant Fusion was a hard blow to this deck, completely removing any slim chance of the deck achieving anything else ever again. All in all, the Super Sentai-inspired strategy has managed to sneak into topping lists in the form of Super Quantum Red Layer and Super Quantal Mech Beast Grampulse being played in non-Super Quantum decks, which is disheartening to say the least. Still, to win it all in a highly competitive event over one of the biggest names in the game is no small feat, and is something this deck will be able to flaunt forever. For the first of the top 10 entries, we're going to be taking a look at another very famous player, and an even better deck builder, Jeff Jones. While a celebrated player before, his biggest claim to fame could be winning the 2010 SJC Edison. Yeah, the Edison. The event that gave rise to the most popular alternative format. He won this event piloting the very famous Quick Draw Dandy Warrior deck. But that's not what we're going to be looking at today. Jeff is somewhat known as being capable of thinking outside the box like no other. Heck, he even topped YCS Minneapolis in 2016 with Dark Magician. That must count for something. But that's not the deck we're going to be looking at today. No. Instead, we'll be turning our sights to 2 years after his SJC Edison victory and into YCS Toronto 2012. While he came just short of winning the event, losing to one Joshua Graham in the finals, he managed to achieve an impressive second place with one of the most complex decks of the time, Grandsoil Psychics. Now, what exactly is Grandsoil Psychics? Well, the Psychic monster type was pretty much irrelevant for the most part in its existence, save for a few specific cards here and there like Psychic Commander and Magical Android. Nevertheless, Jeff Jones managed to see the hidden potential these cards had and concocted a deck list aiming to exploit Grandsoil the Elemental Lord. The Elemental Lords are a series of cards that can summon themselves from your hand by having exactly 5 of their specific attribute in the graveyard, and includes the effects of banned cards, skipping the battle phase of your next turn if they leave the field. In the case of Grandsoil, when summoned by having 5 earth monsters in your grave, it summons a monster from any graveyard, being the effect of Monster Reborn. What you might not be aware of is that none of the Elemental Lords were once per turns. This means you could cycle through several Grandsoils in the same turn, allowing you to spam the board very easily and facilitating an OTK play. As for the Psychics, cards like Serene Psychic Witch is just a better giant rat for the archetype, giving you a lot of consistency and accessibility. Other than that, you just play the good tuners like Psychic Commander and Psychic Jumper to access some shockingly strong synchro monsters like Psychic Nightmare and Thought Ruler Arcfiend. This engine, on the hands of who might just be the best player Yu-Gi-Oh! Of all time, managed to tear through a sea of wind-up and Gear Gaia to a second place finish, earning the much more valued third place spot on this list. For a runner-up in the weirdest decks to ever top, we traveled to YCS Bochum 2015. This was a rough period for Yu-Gi-Oh!, as players had to deal with the sheer dominance of Necros. Even worse, it was the period of time where Necros players would use Jin Releaser rituals to summon their Necros of Unicorn, locking your opponent out of special summoning. While this gave way to interesting tech choices to out the lock in the mirror, such as Bullblader, it cannot be understated how much players despise playing against an almost unbeatable Floodgate played in one of the most expensive decks of all time. Our protagonist for this spot paid no heed to the threats of this Tier 0 format, and won his way into the top 16 playing Mecha Phantom Beast. You know, the one with Mecha Phantom Beast Dracosack and Mecha Phantom Beast Auroradon. That one. Yeah, it's an actual deck with more cards than those. So, what does this deck actually do? Believe it or not, it's a pretty complex synchro strategy with monsters that modulate their own levels based on how many tokens you control. This gave the deck easy access to powerful synchro monsters like Leo, the Keeper of the Sacred Tree, and the archetype's boss monster, Mecha Phantom Beast Jackalus Land. Not just that, since all the deck's monsters are wind, the deck also played Spiritual Wind Art Miyabi to shuffle back problematic cards, as well as Light Imprisoning Mirror and Dark Imprisoning Mirror, as they did not affect the deck's plays at all. Mix that with the biggest surprise factor we've seen yet, and you've got a recipe for success. And while the deck ran out of fuel in the top 16, the fact that an archetype as bad and as ignored as Mecha Phantom Beast managed to top a highly competitive event in one of the most dominating formats the game has ever seen is something to be proud of, even if the deck most likely won off the back of a myriad of floodgates like Mistake and Vanity's Emptiness. But hey, using Jackalus Land to hand loop your opponent by attributing 4 tokens is truly something you have to experience once in your lifetime. Hey you, are you tired of boring, predictable merch? Wouldn't you love it if you could have something more exciting? Something with a random chance to give you more than what you spent on it, but in a legally distinct way that's not gambling? Well, we have nothing like that for you, but we do have something pretty similar. Introducing the DuelLogs TCG Mystery Box. It comes with playmats, card sleeves, a deck box, and not 1, but 2 DuelLogs mini plushies. Individually, all these items would cost over $130. But if you buy them all together in the mystery box, it's only $59.99, being less than half the price if you bought everything individually on the DuelLogs store. However, that's not all, because it also comes with a random rare Yu-Gi-Oh card, guaranteed to be either a staple or a high-value ticket item like Bonfire. Or your box might just contain a whole box of Infinite Forbidden instead. I mean, if you get that, technically each of these boxes is worth more than the entire box itself. Additionally, you also get a whole bunch of other random stuff, but only items that are from the store. If you don't care about card games though, we also have the D&D and Pokemon box just for you. Or if you want everything, there's also the Everything box, which just comes with one of everything from the merch store. Order yours today, check the link in the video description or the display under the video. So, what could be even weirder than Mecha Phantom Beasts and Grandsoil Psychics? Easy, Spaceships. Now, don't go into Master Duel and type in Spaceships because you won't get any results. However, if your name is Alex Mitchell in the years 2010, you can get some shockingly good results. We're looking at his topping deck list for SJC Nashville 2010, which, with some modifications, would use to also top the 2010 United States WCQ. So, just what exactly is this deck? Well, have you played any shoot-'em-up games in like 1985? If so, Gradius will come to mind. Seldom does Konami make references so direct, even if it's their own IPs. But for some reason, Gradius is the exception. Cards like Gradius, Falcon B, Delta Tri, and Trigon are almost carbon copies of their counterparts from Gradius. While not a named archetype like others, these cards have a vague common theme, that being level 4 light machines and having 1200 attack sometimes, which technically makes a Sea Crush Wyvern and Amazement Attendant Comica a part of the theme, but I digress. While these are fun pieces of trivia, they don't really form a cohesive strategy someone would take to a tournament. Or so one would think. Alex Mitchell decided to sleeve up these copies of Blue Thunder, T-45, Jade Knight, and Lord British Spacefighter together with as much generic control cards it could fit, and ended up topping 2 huge events. The deck plays how it looks. You try to make your ship stick and use their alright effects to gain diversity in your plays. Blue Thunder T-45 summons a 1500 attack token when it destroys a monster in battle. Jade Knight protects your machines with 1200 attack or less from trap effects, and searches a level 4 light machine on destruction. Victory Viper XX03 can either gain 400 attack, destroy a face-up spell or trap, or summon a token identical to itself when it destroys a monster in battle. And lastly, if Lord British Spacefighter destroys a monster in battle, you could either attack again, destroy a set card, or summon a 1200 attack token. These are all incredibly mediocre. They're not great at all. To put it into context of its contemporaries, the format for SJC Nashville was Lightsworn and X-Sabers. And for the United States WCQ, it was X-Sabers, Gladiator Beast, and Frog Monarch. This deck was summoning Lord British Spacefighter in a format where players were looping XX Saber Dark Soul and erasing your hand with XX Saber Gotems. And it topped. Twice. This deck takes the crown not only for its inventiveness, or for sheer obscurity of the cards it plays, but mainly because its pilot was so good, he took this absolute pile of cards with no extra deck and landed 2 top cut spots in a row in the biggest events of the year. That takes a very powerful mixture of skill and luck, and I think we're very unlikely to witness a deck even remotely similar in concept to top again. So we must celebrate this love letter to basic, low to the ground Yu-Gi-Oh!, and that earns this deck the #1 spot of the weirdest decks to ever top an event. So that's it for today. Did we miss any strange decks that sneaked into the top cut in any event? If so, let us know down in the comments, as well what kind of videos you'd like to see next, and see you in the next one.